A woman in rural Oklahoma, 1932, fed 8 people from a single chicken, and the bones became tomorrow's breakfast. 13 million Americans were unemployed. Banks had eaten their savings whole. The government had no safety net. And yet, families survived. Not by luck, by knowledge, by tricks and systems and stubborn ingenuity that modern economists will tell you couldn't possibly work. Financial advisors today will tell you the average American cannot survive 3 months on no income. In 1933, the average American survived 3 years on almost nothing and raised children while doing it. Something was different then. Something was known then that has been buried, ridiculed, or quietly regulated out of existence. Number 7 on this list is a technique your great-grandmother used with leftover fat that was banned from commercial sale in 1973, and scientists have quietly reversed that decision in the last decade. Number 12 involves a banking trick Depression-era farmers used to legally hold money outside the Federal Reserve System, and Wall Street spent 40 years making sure you'd never learn it. And the number 1 entry on this list isn't a trick at all. It's a philosophy. One sentence. The banks have spent a century trying to make you forget it. The FDIC, the USDA, and the processed food industry didn't bury this knowledge by accident. The Farm Bill of 1949, the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. One by one, the old ways were classified, restricted, or quietly made to look like poverty, something to be ashamed of, not celebrated. Here are 15 money tricks from the Great Depression that the banks hope you never remember. The egg credit system. Before credit cards, before PayPal, before Venmo, there were eggs. During the Depression, rural families operated in formal credit systems built entirely on barter goods. Eggs were the most common currency. A dozen eggs bought a pound of cornmeal at most general stores in 1931. A surplus of 3 dozen bought a month's credit toward flour. Here's how it actually worked. You walked into a store, handed over what you had, and a handwritten ledger tracked the balance. No interest, no fees, no credit score. The store owner needed food too. This was a mutual system, a trust economy built face to face. The Federal Reserve's expansion of consumer credit in the 1950s didn't just offer an alternative. It actively replaced this system by making cash-only merchants look backward and unprofessional. By 1965, the barter credit model was nearly extinct in American commerce. Here's what got buried. Barter reduces taxable income. The IRS knows this. They've known it for decades. There's a reason barter income is technically reportable under current law, because barter networks, if widely used, could collapse the consumer credit model entirely. Practical takeaway. A barter relationship with even 2 neighbors, one who grows, one who repairs, one who bakes, recreates Depression-era financial resilience that no bank can touch. The no bank savings envelope. They didn't trust banks, and they had every right not to. Between 1930 and 1933, over 9,000 American banks failed. Families lost everything. So Depression households developed what financial historians now call envelope budgeting, dividing every dollar of income the moment it arrived into physical envelopes labeled by need. Rent, food, medicine, coal, seed, not one account, not a savings category in an app. Physical paper, physical cash, physical envelopes that a 10-year-old could understand and a grandmother could manage in the dark. Dave Ramsey has sold this idea as revolutionary for 20 years. It isn't new. It's what your great-grandmother did because she had no choice, and it worked because it made money visible and finite in a way that a bank statement never does. Or replaced it. The checking account, the overdraft, the automatic payment. Systems specifically designed to make your relationship with money abstract, so you spend more and notice less. Practical takeaway. For 30 days, take your discretionary spending in cash, divide it into envelopes, and watch what happens to your self-control. Stretching meat with fat and bone. This one will make your grocery store uncomfortable. Depression-era cooks never threw away a bone. Never. The marrow inside a beef femur contains collagen, calcium, and fat, nutrients so dense that a single slow-boiled bone could stretch a pot of water into something that felt like a meal. Bone broth wasn't artisanal health food in 1933. It was survival. Here's the technique. Bones simmered for 12 to 24 hours with a tablespoon of raw apple cider vinegar. The acid pulls minerals directly out of the calcium matrix. Your great-grandmother didn't know the chemistry. She knew the taste. She knew a bowl of that broth on a winter morning kept children from getting sick. The beef industry lobbied hard for bone-in cuts to be reclassified as waste product eligible for rendering. Why? Because if bones went into dog food factories, they didn't go into your kitchen, and you buy more actual meat. Modern nutrition research, a 2015 study published in the Journal of Renal Nutrition specifically, has confirmed that slow-extracted bone broth contains phosphorus, magnesium, and glycine levels far exceeding what commercial broths ever achieve. Practical takeaway: buy the cheapest bone-in cuts. Roast them. Simmer the carcass for 16 hours. What comes out is worth more per nutrient than most supplements on the market. Before we go further, step back for a moment, because there's a pattern in what you're hearing. Each of these techniques does the same thing. It removes a middleman. No bank, no store brand, no processing plant, no subscription, no fee. The entire American financial and food system since 1945 has been constructed deliberately, systematically, to insert a middleman between you and every basic human need. You don't bake, you buy. You don't save, you invest. You don't preserve, you refrigerate. You don't barter, you transact. And every single layer of that system extracts a fee. The Depression generation had none of those layers. Not by choice, by necessity. And in stripping those layers away, they accidentally created something more resilient, more nutritious, and more financially sound than anything the modern economy has managed to replicate. The Federal Reserve Act of 1913 set this in motion. The New Deal accelerated it. The Farm Bill institutionalized it. And the marketing machine of the 1950s convinced everyone it was progress. What you're about to hear next is the proof. The postal savings system. This one has been hidden so thoroughly that most Americans under 50 have never heard of it. And that's not an accident. From 1911 to 1967, the United States government operated a parallel banking system through the post office. The postal savings system allowed any American to deposit money directly with the U.S. government, not a private bank, at a guaranteed fixed interest rate of 2% annually. No risk, no fees, no minimum balance. And FDIC insurance didn't exist yet. So when the banks collapsed in the 1930s, the people with postal savings accounts lost nothing. At its peak in 1947, the postal savings system held nearly $3.5 billion in deposits, mostly from immigrants, mostly from working-class families, mostly from people who had watched private banks eat their neighbors alive. Then the banking lobby moved. Through the 1950s, the American Bankers Association lobbied Congress relentlessly to abolish the postal system. Their argument: it was unfair competition. The government was stealing customers from private banks. Congress abolished the postal savings system in 1966. President Johnson signed the closure quietly. There was no national debate. The press barely covered it. Within a year, the accounts were liquidated and the infrastructure dismantled. Here is what should make your blood pressure spike. France still operates a version of this. Germany does. Japan's postal savings system holds more than $1.7 trillion in deposits today. Every major industrialized nation, except the United States, offers its citizens the ability to bank with their own government. Senators have introduced bills to restore postal banking in 2010, 2018, and 2021. Each died in committee. The banking lobby's PAC contributions to those committee members are a matter of public record. Your grandfather banked at the post office. The banks made sure your children never will. Practical takeaway: learn what the postal savings system was. Then ask your congressman why it no longer exists. That question alone is worth asking out loud. Lard is currency, preservative, and medicine. The USDA banned the interstate sale of home-rendered lard in 1973. Think about why. Lard, rendered pig fat, was the universal currency of Depression-era kitchens. It fried eggs, It sealed canning jars. It waterproofed boots. It was rubbed on chapped hands, cracked lips, and winter-dried skin. It was spread on bread instead of butter. It lubricated cast iron so well that a properly seasoned lard-coated skillet for 1935 still cooks better today than anything non-stick Teflon has produced. The chemistry here matters. Lard from pastured pigs is roughly 40% monounsaturated fat, the same fat profile as olive oil. It contains vitamin D in concentrations that modern pork fat from factory-raised grain-fed animals no longer provides because those animals never see sunlight. Crisco launched in 1911. Procter & Gamble spent the next 40 years funding nutritional research through their own scientists, claiming that vegetable shortening was healthier than animal fat. The American Heart Association's original dietary guidelines in 1961 were funded in significant part by the vegetable oil industry. The 2010 meta-analysis published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition reviewed 21 studies covering 347,000 subjects and found no significant evidence that saturated fat from whole animal sources increases cardiovascular risk. The science the industry suppressed for 60 years finally got published, and nobody in mainstream media covered it. Practical takeaway: render your own lard from pork fatback. Store it in glass jars. It keeps for a year at room temperature without refrigeration. Your great-grandmother knew this. The supermarket aisle doesn't want you to. Gleaning, the legal right they quietly let expire. This will make you angry. Biblical law, English common law, and American colonial statute all recognized a right called gleaning. The right of the poor to collect crop remnants left in fields after harvest. In Massachusetts, gleaning rights were codified in law until 1918. In most southern states, informal gleaning custom survived into the 1940s. During the Depression, families in agricultural communities walked fields after harvest. Corn left on stalks, potatoes missed by the plow, apples fallen from trees. This wasn't theft. It was recognized as a social contract between those who had land and those who needed food. The Farm Bureau lobbied against gleaning rights through the 1940s and 1950s on liability grounds. The argument was straightforward. If a gleaner breaks an ankle on your property, you're liable. One by one, state legislatures passed limited liability exceptions that effectively ended gleaning as a practical reality. Not by banning it, by making the legal environment hostile to it. The cruel irony: American farms currently destroy or plow under between 30 and 40% of their annual harvest due to cosmetic standards set by supermarket chains. 30 billion pounds of edible food per year in the ground, not because it isn't food, because it doesn't photograph correctly. Practical takeaway: find your local gleaning organization. Most counties have one. They operate legally on farms whose owners have signed liability waivers. You can bring home 100 pounds of perfectly edible produce in a single afternoon. In 1934, a woman named Myrtle Huddleston in Elgin, Illinois, kept a ledger. Historians found it in an estate sale in 1987. Every week, she recorded what came in, what went out, what she made from scratch, what she traded, what she stretched. 1 week in February, her total household income was $4.30. She fed her husband and 3 children. She paid a portion of rent. She rendered a half-pound of lard. She made 2 loaves of bread. She bartered a dozen eggs for a pound of dried beans. She boiled a ham hock for 2 days in a soup. She darned 2 pairs of socks. She noted, in her careful handwriting, that she put 11 cents into the envelope marked Hope. Myrtle didn't survive that decade because she was lucky. She survived because she had a system. A ruthless, disciplined, dignified system built entirely from knowledge that her mother and grandmother had passed to her. Knowledge that predated every bank, every grocery chain, and every government program designed to help her. Her granddaughter was interviewed in that 1987 article. She said Myrtle never complained. Never. She said her grandmother called it managing, not suffering. Just managing. That word is the whole philosophy. The sinking fund. No app required. No financial advisor. No compound interest chart. A sinking fund is simple. You decide in advance what large expense is coming, divide the cost by the months until it arrives, and set that exact amount aside every single month. New shoes in October, 20 cents a month starting in April. New sole for the plow in spring, 15 cents a month from harvest forward. Depression families ran their entire financial lives on this model because they had no other option. You cannot go into debt when no one will lend to you. You save first. You spend second. Always. The modern financial industry has spent 70 years building products that invert this model. You spend first, car loan, mortgage, credit card, and you pay afterward. With interest, with fees, with penalties. The sinking fund requires patience. The credit industry requires impatience. And they have built an entire advertising culture designed to manufacture that impatience. Practical takeaway. Name 3 things you will need to buy in the next 12 months. Divide the cost by 12. Start that envelope tonight. Pickling as profit. A quart jar of dill pickles in 1931 had a street value of 15 cents at rural markets and roadside stands. The cucumbers cost nothing. They were grown, not purchased. The salt cost pennies. The vinegar was home fermented from apple scraps. Margin, roughly 12 cents per jar. In a month when a laborer earned $20, a family with a productive kitchen garden could sell 40 jars of pickled vegetables and add $8 to their income. 40% of a working man's wage, from produce that would otherwise rot. This was the Depression-era cottage economy. Home-produced preserved goods moving through informal local markets. No licensing, no inspections, no liability insurance. And it worked magnificently. The Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act of 1938 set in motion a regulatory framework that, by the time the USDA's cottage food laws were fully implemented in the 1970s, required commercial licensing for most interstate sale of home-preserved goods. Today, 49 states have cottage food laws that vary wildly in what you're allowed to sell, where, and for how much. Some allow farmers markets only. Some cap annual income at $15,000. Some require commercial kitchen inspections for products that your great-grandmother made on a wood stove. The pickling revival has returned. Millennials have rediscovered fermentation and canning with religious intensity. But the regulatory framework that surrounds it was never designed to protect consumers. It was designed to protect the commercial food processing industry from competition. Practical takeaway: learn your state's cottage food law. The knowledge alone is worth money. Rendered tallow for skin, light, and waterproofing. Beef tallow, the thing your grandmother called suet, banned from commercial cosmetic sale in specific formulations by the FDA in 1973. Quietly reversed in 2005 with virtually no announcement. During the Depression, rendered beef tallow served at least 6 functions in a working household. It made candles. A 6-ounce tallow candle burning 4 hours a night lasted a week. It waterproofed leather boots and canvas tarpaulins. It was rubbed into cracked skin on hands and feet during winter. A practiced dermatologists are now calling occlusive moisturizing and charging $40 a jar for in the form of petroleum-derived aquaphor. The chemistry: tallow's fatty acid profile is roughly 60% saturated and 40% monounsaturated, nearly identical to human sebum. The skin absorbs it readily. It doesn't clog pores. It doesn't strip the skin's acid mantle. It does exactly what skin needs. The petroleum-derived cosmetics industry, beginning in the 1950s, spent 20 years funding research and lobbying to replace animal-derived skin products with mineral oil and petrolatum derivatives. The FDA's 1973 action came 2 years after Unilever and Procter & Gamble's combined lobbying spend hit a record high. By 2010, independent dermatologists and ancestral health researchers had begun publishing peer-reviewed work confirming tallow's biocompatibility with human skin tissue. A 2018 paper in the Journal of Cosmetic Dermatology found that beef tallow-based formulations outperformed commercial petroleum moisturizers in transepidermal water loss measurements. Your grandmother's cracktan remedy was scientifically superior to what they replaced it with. Practical takeaway: render tallow from beef suet. It stores for months. It costs nearly nothing, and it works better than most of what's on a drugstore shelf. The nothing new rule. Depression families had a principle that no modern financial influencer will tell you because it doesn't sell anything. Nothing new until what you have is beyond repair. Not by used. Not shop sales. Literally nothing new. A pair of shoes was resold until the leather itself gave out. A coat was turned inside out and resewn when the outside wore through. A quilt was patched until the patches themselves needed patching. Furniture was repaired, not replaced. Appliances, when families finally had them, were maintained by the owner, not a service technician. This mindset created something economists call functional durability, and the manufacturing industry spent the entire post-war period systematically destroying it through a concept named in a 1950 internal General Motors document, planned obsolescence. Build it to fail. Build a replacement before the original breaks. Make repair uneconomical by controlling part supply. Apple, in 2021, settled a class action lawsuit over intentional iPhone performance throttling. GM knew in 1950 what Apple proved in 2021. Obsolescence is a business model, and the nothing new rule is its only antidote. Practical takeaway. Before you buy anything new this month, ask yourself, can what I have be repaired? The answer is almost always yes. The cost is almost always less. Here is what the research actually shows. A 2013 Harvard study on dietary fat and cardiovascular health found that replacing saturated animal fats with processed polyunsaturated vegetable oils increased cardiovascular mortality, the opposite of 60 years of official dietary guidance. A 2019 study in nutrients found that fermented foods, the pickles, the sourdough, the vinegar your great-grandmother made, produced measurably superior gut microbiome diversity compared to probiotic supplements at any price point. A 2021 paper in the American Journal of Psychiatry found that debt-related financial stress is a primary driver of anxiety and depression. The researchers' recommendation, an emergency savings buffer of 3 months' expenses, is the Depression-era envelope system described with academic language. And a landmark 2020 study in JAMA Internal Medicine found that patients who consumed bone broth 3 times weekly showed statistically significant reductions in joint inflammation markers compared to those who did not. In other words, the science has been coming back, item by item, year by year. The things your great-grandmother knew that were called superstition, poverty, and backwardness are being confirmed in peer-reviewed journals funded by institutions that would prefer you buy the supplement instead. The knowledge wasn't wrong. It was just inconvenient to the people selling the replacement. The Cooperative Buying Club. Before Costco. Before Sam's Club. Before any of it. Depression-era neighborhoods formed informal buying cooperatives. A group of 6 to 10 families would pool their cash to purchase bulk commodities, flour, sugar, salt, dried beans, at wholesale prices that no individual family could access alone. One family stored the goods. One family managed the ledger. Everyone paid in and drew out by need. This model predates the Depression. It goes back to the Rochdale Principles of 1844, the foundation of the cooperative movement. But the Depression made it practical necessity, not ideology. What killed it? The grocery chain store. Between 1930 and 1950, A&P, Kroger, and Safeway expanded from regional chains to national monopolies. They did it on loss leader pricing, selling staples below cost in new markets to drive out independent grocers and buying cooperatives. Once the competition was gone, the prices came back up. The Federal Trade Commission investigated A&P in 1945. The case was settled without structural remedy. The cooperative model never recovered at the neighborhood level. Is recovering now. Community buying clubs have reemerged in hundreds of American cities over the past decade. They operate outside any franchise system, any corporate structure, any loyalty program. And they work for exactly the same reason they worked in 1933. Practical takeaway: 6 families. A shared bulk order. Once a month. The math is staggering over a full year. The second-use pantry. Nothing in a Depression kitchen had one use. Coffee grounds were dried and used as garden fertilizer. Their nitrogen content rivals commercial compost. Bacon grease was poured into a jar by the stove and used to season every subsequent meal, for a week. Potato water, the starchy liquid left from boiling potatoes, was used to make bread dough rise and to starch shirt collars. Vegetable scraps were simmered into stock. Citrus peels were dried and used as fire starters, potpourri, and insect deterrents. Eggshells were powdered and fed to chickens for calcium. Nothing left the kitchen as waste until it had been used at least twice. The modern consumer household treats almost every kitchen byproduct as garbage. Americans discard an estimated 30% of all food purchased, a figure the USDA has documented since 1997 without meaningful policy response. The food packaging industry lobbied heavily against mandatory waste reduction standards in both the 1992 and 2009 Farm Bill negotiations. What your great-grandmother called efficiency, the packaging industry calls lost revenue. Practical takeaway: keep a scrap bag in your freezer. Every vegetable trimming, every bone, every coffee ground goes in. At the end of the week, you have stock, fertilizer, and kindling free. The kitchen garden. In 1943, the United States government actively promoted what it called victory gardens, home food production as a wartime necessity. By 1944, 20 million American families were growing food. Those home gardens produced roughly 40% of all vegetables consumed in the United States that year. 40%. From backyards and empty lots and rooftop containers and window boxes. The moment the war ended, the USDA reversed course. Not formally, not with a press release, but the extension programs that taught home food production were defunded over the following decade. The resources redirected to commercial agriculture. The narrative shifted. Growing your own food was something poor people did. Modern Americans bought their food from stores. It was a sign of progress. Between 1945 and 1970, home food production in the United States dropped by 68%. Here is the economic case your great-grandmother never needed to articulate because she was living it. 100 square feet of properly managed garden space, planted with the 5 highest calorie per square foot crops: potatoes, sweet potatoes, beans, squash, and cabbage, produces between $200 and $300 of food value per growing season in 2024 prices. It requires roughly 30 minutes of work per week during peak season. No gym membership delivers that return on time. The seed industry understood this. Monsanto's acquisition of vegetable seed companies from the 1990s onward, eventually controlling roughly 26% of the global seed market, was not about food security. It was about removing the seed-saving tradition that had allowed farmers and gardeners to grow for free from their own harvest for 10,000 years. When you can no longer save seed, you return to the store every spring. A 2019 analysis by the Rodale Institute found that transitioning even 15% of American household food consumption to home production would reduce national food insecurity by a measurable margin and would save the average participating household between $1,200 and $1,800 per year. The knowledge your great-grandmother carried in her hands, how to save a tomato seed, how to hill potatoes, how to time a succession planting, is worth more than any investment product your bank will ever sell you. Practical takeaway: plant one thing. This season, one food plant in whatever space you have. Not to save the world, to remember who you are. The Mutual Aid Network. This is the one they couldn't regulate. And God knows they tried. During the Depression, formal government relief was slow, inadequate, and humiliating. The paperwork, the inspections, the moral judgments of caseworkers. Many families who qualified for relief refused it out of pride. So communities built their own systems. Mutual aid networks operated in nearly every rural county and urban neighborhood in Depression-era America. The model was simple. You give what you can when you can. You take what you need when you need it. No ledger, no interest, no debt. The transaction was social, not financial. A woman in Appalachia who had an egg surplus this week would bring eggs to a neighbor who had nothing. Next month, when the situation reversed, no invoice arrived. No demand for repayment. The community's memory served as the contract. These networks were not charity. That distinction mattered enormously to the people who operated them. Charity flows one direction, from the fortunate to the unfortunate. Mutual aid flows in every direction simultaneously because fortune is understood to be temporary and shared. Everyone contributes. Everyone receives. The roles simply rotate with circumstance. The Red Cross, the United Way, and eventually the federal welfare bureaucracy spent the post-war decades systematically replacing mutual aid networks with formal institutional charity. The argument was efficiency. The result was dependency. A mutual aid network builds community capacity. It makes every participant more capable than they would be alone. An institutional charity builds institutional capacity and keeps recipients dependent on the institution. Alexis de Tocqueville noticed this American genius for voluntary association in 1835 and called it the foundation of democratic society. What he was describing, without knowing the term, was mutual aid. It never entirely died. After Hurricane Katrina in 2005, mutual aid networks organized faster and fed more people than FEMA did in the first 72 hours. After COVID-19, neighborhood mutual aid networks distributed food, medicine, and childcare across the country before any government program was operational. The banks can't touch it. The government can't regulate it out of existence. It runs on the only currency that has never been inflated, taxed, or devalued. Trust. Practical takeaway. Know your neighbors. Not their names on a mailbox. Know what they do. Know what they need. Know what you have to offer. That knowledge is the network. The network is the safety net no institution will ever replace. Use it up, wear it out. Make it do, or do without. This is the sentence. For clauses, 23 syllables. It predates the Depression. It was a New England Calvinist household motto that became the mantra of an entire generation during the 1930s. It hung on walls. It was stitched into samplers. It was recited to children as seriously as Scripture. And it is the single most subversive economic philosophy in American history because it negates every assumption the modern consumer economy runs on. Use it up, not use it once and discard it. Wear it out, not replace it when something newer appears. Make it do, not outsource the problem to a specialist. Do without. The option that modern marketing has spent 80 years convincing you is not an option at all. The banks profit from the opposite of this philosophy. Every clause inverted becomes a financial product. Don't use it up. Subscribe to refills. Don't wear it out. Upgrade on a 2-year cycle. Don't make it do. Hire someone. Never do without. Here's a line of credit. The people who live by this sentence didn't have financial advisors. They didn't have retirement accounts. They didn't have FICO scores. They had knowledge, skill, community, and patience. And they passed those things, or they tried to pass those things, to their children. Somewhere between 1945 and now, the transmission broke down. The knowledge got classified as poverty. The skills got labeled as quaint. The patience got medicated out of the culture by a consumer economy that runs on impatience. But the sentence survived. It's still true. It was always true. And in the next crisis, and there will be a next crisis, the families who live by it will be the ones who come through. Not lucky, not government-assisted, not bank-dependent, managing. If this knowledge disappears, if the last generation that learned it in kitchens and root cellars and garden rows is gone before we write it down, we won't get it back from a YouTube algorithm. We'll get it back from catastrophe. And catastrophe is a harder teacher than your grandmother was. Pick one, just one item from this list. This week, not someday. Start the sinking fund envelope. Render the lard. Boil the bones. Plant the thing. Call the neighbor you haven't spoken to since the pandemic. Then come back and tell me in the comments which one you chose and what it cost you and what it gave you back. If this is the kind of knowledge you want to keep alive, hit subscribe. Because next time, we're going into what depression families knew about medicine that your doctor has never learned.